Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room was crowded but felt hollow. A long slab of wood served as a table, its surface scarred by years of elbows, knives, and restless hands tapping through midnight briefings. A humming projector washed its pale glow across the wall, throwing up lines of topography, grids of numbers, and a red circle that pulsed like a wound. No one looked at her. Boots scraped, chairs shifted, pens clicked nervously against pads. Every man here seemed louder than he had to be, as though noise itself could protect them from what was coming. But she sat still, quiet, watching. Captain Mara Ellison. To them just a name on the roster, a presence they tolerated because orders said so. But names carried weight, and hers had become heavy, too heavy for most to speak out loud. The colonel stood at the head of the room, gravel in his throat, shoulders square as if carved from stone. "The compound is here," he said, tapping the glowing map. His finger struck the wall with a dull thud. "Two ridgelines, one road in. Intel puts the target inside. Movement suggests he doesn't know we're close." Mara studied the map. Valleys and lines, the jagged rise of the mountains, every crease of the land burned into her vision. She traced the path in her mind, the distance between buildings, the angles from which a rifle could sing, the places shadows would fall when the moon climbed high. Her chest tightened. That valley, that same road, that same compound. Her brother's convoy had never made it through. But no one else knew that. Not here. Not yet. She hadn't told them. And silence, she'd learned, could protect and destroy in equal measure. The colonel continued. "You'll move at 300. Extraction window closes at 500. This isn't a raid. This isn't about firepower. This is about precision." His eyes swept the room, sharp enough to pin a man in place. "Get in. Get it done. Get out." For a moment the silence held, and then Sergeant Holt broke it, as he always did. "2 hours in and out," he said, slapping the table like he owned it. His voice was too loud, too casual, dripping with bravado. "We've done worse. We'll do this." He leaned back, chair creaking. "Unless someone here thinks they can't handle the heat." A few chuckles followed. Boots kicked lightly against the floor, the easy laughter of men pretending they weren't afraid. None of them looked at Mara. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers curled just enough to dig into fabric. Every word Holt threw felt aimed at her, though he didn't say her name. He didn't need to. The room's silence already had. The colonel wrapped the briefing quickly after that, words clipped, efficient. "Gear up. You've got 90 minutes." Chairs scraped again, men muttering as they filed out. Plans, jokes, talk about the food they'd miss or the sleep they wouldn't get. Small talk to fill the void. Mara rose with them, her body moving but her thoughts tethered to the map still glowing against the wall. The red circle pulsed like a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. As the colonel passed, his eyes caught hers, just for a second, long enough for her to see what no one else had noticed. He remembered. Outside, the air hit her with a sharp chill, desert night folding around her like a damp blanket. Engines growled in the distance. Metal clanked. Someone cursed under their breath, another laughed too loudly. The base was alive, a city that never slept. She walked past it all, boots crunching against gravel, until the hangar loomed before her. Inside, rows of machines sat quiet under floodlights, metal beasts waiting to be stirred awake. And there, at the far end, leaned against a rack, was her rifle. Long, black, cold. She approached it like one might approach an old friend, with a respect built on years of shared silence. Her hand traced its barrel, each groove and mark telling a story only she could read. She had carried it across deserts and mountains, through firestorms and nights so still she could hear her own blood. She sat down beside it. Not to clean it, it was already perfect. Not to test it, she already knew. She sat because she needed its presence, needed to feel anchored. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't turn, she knew the rhythm. "Didn't take you long to find your toy," Holt's voice carried across the space, smug and careless. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, grin cutting through the dim light. She said nothing. "You don't say much, do you?" he pressed. His tone was easy, but it carried an edge. "Some of the guys think it's unsettling." Still silence. He stepped closer, his boots striking the floor with slow, deliberate taps. "Look, I don't care what happened last year. I don't care about the stories. You pull your weight, we're good. Just don't freeze out there. Can't afford another ghost story." That word, ghost. Her jaw tightened. Her grip on the rifle twitched. For a fleeting second she thought of letting silence shatter, thought of throwing his words back at him, sharp and cutting. But then she caught his eyes, and she saw it. Behind the arrogance, beneath the grin, was fear. He wasn't mocking her. He was terrified she might fail him. And suddenly, Holt wasn't the enemy. He was just another soldier clinging to noise to drown out the quiet that came before missions like this. She lowered her gaze, let her breath steady, and finally let her voice slip free. "I don't freeze." Soft, steady, almost too quiet to hear. But he heard it, his smirk faltered. For a brief heartbeat the hangar bowed to silence. Then he left without another word. The echo of his footsteps faded. The engines outside kept growling, but inside the hangar it felt like something had shifted. Myra reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded letter. Its edges were worn, creases deep from being opened and closed too many times. She didn't need to read it. She already knew every word, every curve of her brother's handwriting. She just held it against her chest, eyes closed, breath slow. Tomorrow she would step into the valley that had taken him. Tomorrow she would walk the same road his convoy never returned from. Tomorrow she would find the man who ordered it. And tomorrow she would decide whether silence could speak louder than bullets. But tonight she sat with her rifle, the letter, and the heavy quiet that carried more weight than anyone in that briefing room would ever understand. The kind of silence that bowed when she chose to break it. What kind of soldier carries a letter into combat? The thought needled Mara as she tightened the straps of her vest, each buckle snapping into place with a hollow click. Around her, the others were louder, metal clashing, voices rising, jokes half-formed. The ritual of noise before the storm. She moved differently, slow, deliberate, every motion stripped of waste. A woman building armor not just of Kevlar but of silence. 30 minutes, the colonel barked, his voice cutting through the hangar. Engines outside already rumbled awake, rotor blades groaning against the wind. The night pressed thick and black against the steel doors. Holt passed behind her, muttering something crude about the ride in. Another man laughed, but no one addressed her directly, not until a younger soldier, barely past 20, leaned too close. "You really don't talk, do you?" he asked, his voice carrying both curiosity and unease. His name was Dawson, first deployment, still smelled faintly of home. Mara didn't answer. She adjusted the strap across her chest. Dawson hesitated, then gave a thin smile. "My mom, she used to say silence is the loudest thing in a room." He laughed awkwardly. "Guess she'd like you." For the first time, Mara lifted her eyes to meet his. He flinched, but not because her stare was cold, because it was steady, measured, a look that didn't need words. The colonel called them to load. Conversation scattered into final checks. Boots thudded against the tarmac as they filed toward the waiting bird, its blades chopping the night into pieces. The helicopter swallowed them one by one. Inside, red light painted their faces harsh, carving deep lines into men who were suddenly older than they had been an hour ago. Mara slid into her seat, rifle cradled across her knees. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. "Wheels up in 30 seconds. Hold tight." The cabin filled with sound, the roar of engines, the metallic rattle of bolts, the nervous tapping of fingers against gear. Holt leaned forward, shouting over the noise, tossing bravado like confetti. 2 hours in and out, boys. Easy ride. Let's bring back a story. But his eyes flickered once toward Mara, just once, and the confidence didn't quite reach them. The helicopter lifted, shuddering as the base shrank below. Out the open side door, the desert sprawled endless, a dark ocean of sand and stone under a moon that hid more than it revealed. Mara stared into it, the wind pulling at her hair, the letter pressed flat inside her pocket like a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. 9 months ago, another convoy had flown over this same stretch. They hadn't come back. Her brother hadn't come back. And here she was chasing the same horizon into the same jaws. A voice cut into her thoughts. Dawson again, leaning close, shouting just enough to be heard. What's it like? First time over it feels like, I don't know, like the air itself is watching you. She almost smiled, almost, but instead she answered softly, so softly he had to strain to catch it. You get used to it, the watching never stops. He stared at her wide-eyed. Maybe he thought she meant the enemy. Maybe he didn't realize she meant the ghosts. The helicopter shuddered again. The pilot's voice broke in. 2 minutes out, get your heads right. The cabin stilled. Men shifted grips on their rifles. Jokes died. Holt cracked his neck, eyes fixed ahead. Dawson swallowed hard, trying to look braver than he felt. And Mara, she closed her eyes for just one breath, long enough to see her brother's face, long enough to hear his voice, steady and teasing. You always count the shots, Mara. Don't you know some things can't be measured? The rotors screamed. The desert tilted beneath them, and then with a violent drop they were down. Boots hit dirt. The helicopter roared away, swallowed by the night. Silence followed, heavy, immediate, the kind that pressed against the chest. The team moved quickly, lines practiced, rifles up. Holt took point, barking hands signals sharp as blades. Dawson kept close, breathing too loud, boots crunching too heavy. Mara drifted along the flank, eyes always scanning, rifle balanced with the grace of habit. The valley rose ahead, dark ridges like broken teeth, shadows pooling thick in every crevice. The road stretched narrow, a ribbon of pale dust under the moon. Her stomach knotted. That road, that was where the convoy had bled into the earth. Holt's hand shot up, fist closed, stop. The squad froze, crouching low, rifles sweeping arcs of darkness. The night held its breath. Even the wind stilled. Mara's finger hovered against the trigger guard. Her heartbeat slowed, her breath finding rhythm. She scanned the ridge. Nothing moved. No flash of glass. No shift of stone. But still something was wrong. Holt gestured again, 2 fingers forward. The line crept on. Boots softer now, breaths shorter. Dawson edged close to Mara, whispering through clenched teeth. Feels like they're waiting. She didn't answer. Because he was right. The compound revealed itself slowly, like a beast crouched in the shadows. High walls, a gate half broken, towers rising at uneven angles. It looked deserted, but Mara knew better. Silence this thick always meant something breathing on the other side. Holt raised his fist again. The team dropped low, gathering just beyond the outer wall. He leaned in, eyes sharp. 2 teams, we breach north and south, quick and clean. Then his gaze slid to Mara. For the first time he addressed her directly. You've got Overwatch. High ridge, east side, clear our way in. The words should have been routine, but his tone carried weight, not trust, not doubt, something in between. Mara gave a single nod. She broke from the group, moving silently along the shadowed ridge, each step deliberate, each movement muscle-deep memory. The rifle rode easy in her hands. Her breath matched the rhythm of the earth. Halfway up she paused. The valley stretched below, dark and endless. She imagined her brother's convoy rolling through, headlights cutting the night, laughter cracking through radios. She imagined the blast, the fire, the silence that followed. Her jaw clenched, she climbed higher. At the crest she settled into the dust, rifle sliding into place. The world narrowed to the scope's circle. Crosshairs cut across stone, walls, towers. Empty windows stared back like hollow eyes. Then movement. A shadow shifted behind a tower slit. Quick, careless, the kind of movement a trained soldier wouldn't make. Her breath stilled. Finger rested against the trigger, but she didn't fire, not yet. Because in that moment another sound reached her. A whisper in the headset, Holt's voice sharp, hushed. "South team in position, waiting on your go." Her scope lingered on the tower. The shadow was still. No clear shot, no certainty. She lowered her cheek against the stock. Eyes steady, voice finally breaking the silence in her throat. "Not yet." 3 words, soft, measured. But in the dead air of the valley, even silence bowed to them. Why didn't she take the shot? The question lingered in Holt's voice, sharp through the headset, though he never said it aloud. He was waiting. They all were. Soldiers crouched against the wall of the compound, rifles raised, breaths shallow. All they needed was her word. And still, Mara's scope held on the tower. The shadow hadn't moved again. Maybe it was nothing, a trick of moonlight, or maybe it was everything. She whispered into the mic, steady, controlled. "Hold, one more sweep." Static crackled, then Holt's reply clipped intense. "Copy, one sweep." Mara's rifle drifted slowly across the walls, the gate, the broken windows. Every dark opening pulled at her, daring her to believe it was empty. But she'd been here before. She knew how silence could lie. Her breath slowed. Her finger curled, not against the trigger but alongside it. Patience wasn't weakness. It was survival. And then she saw it. The faintest shimmer along the far wall, a glint of glass catching moonlight. Sniper scope. Her lungs locked. She shifted the crosshairs, heart thudding once heavy. A figure crouched against the wall, rifle tilted upward. Aimed not at Holt's team but at her. She fired. The shot split the night. The valley echoed with thunder. The figure crumpled. Rifle clattered against stone. And silence screamed. "Contact," Holt barked, his voice breaking the moment wide open. The squad surged forward. Explosions of sound, boots hammering dirt, rifles cracking, shouts torn raw. The compound erupted alive, shadows pouring from walls, bursts of muzzle flash tearing the dark. From her ridge, Mara's world shrank to her scope, one target at a time. A man sprinting for the tower dropped, another leaning over the gate with a rifle gone. She moved like water, each shot smooth, precise, inevitable. But between each pull of the trigger she felt it, the echo of another night, another valley, another silence broken by fire. Her brother's voice ghosted through memory. "You can't count what matters, Mara, not everything." Her throat burned, she pressed it down, focused. Below, Holt's voice cut through gunfire. "North wall clear, push through." The team surged into the compound, rifles raised, boots scattering dust. Dawson's voice cracked over comms, higher, younger. "South wall, multiple contacts." Mara swung her scope, caught the movement. 3 figures closing in, too close to Dawson's line. She exhaled, squeezed. One dropped. The second stumbled, fell. The third slipped into shadow, gone. "2 down," she whispered. "Last one moving west." Her voice was calm, even as her pulse slammed against her ribs. Inside the compound, chaos folded in on itself. Grenades thudded, doors splintered. Men shouted names, orders, curses. The night filled with noise too thick for thought. Mara kept her place, her ridge, her silence. Until she saw it. A door at the back of the compound, rusted, half hidden. And from it a figure slipped into the open, quick, deliberate, not fleeing but moving with intent. Tall, lean. The way he carried himself was wrong. Not panic, not fear, purpose. Her chest went tight. She couldn't see his face, but something inside her screamed. It could be him. The man who ordered the convoy strike. The man her brother never came back from. Her finger froze on the trigger. One breath, too. "Target moving, back exit," she whispered into comms. "Take him," Holt's voice snapped back. But she didn't, not yet. Because in the curve of his movement, in the certainty of his steps, she saw something familiar. The same kind of certainty her brother carried. The kind that came from leading, from believing you couldn't be touched. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, the man vanished into shadow. "Damn it, Ellison," Holt's voice tore through her headset. "We don't have time for ghosts. Call it if you see him again." She swallowed hard, the taste of sand dry on her tongue. The fight below dragged on, but the weight in her chest was heavier than the rifle. She had the shot. She'd let it pass. And for the first time in 9 months, she wasn't sure why. Minutes stretched. The compound was cleared room by room, gunfire tapering off, shouts turning to echoes. The last shots rang out sharp, then died. Silence crept back, thick and smothering. "Compound secure," Holt reported, his voice breathless, rough. Mara scanned the ridge again. The towers, the walls, the empty door where the figure had vanished. Nothing. Her hands trembled once before she stilled them. She descended the ridge slowly, boots sliding against loose stone. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached the compound, the squad was already regrouping, faces smeared with dust, eyes hollow. Holt spotted her, jaw tight. He didn't speak at first, just stared, his silence louder than anger. Then finally, "Next time, don't hesitate." He turned away before she could answer. Dawson lingered, wide-eyed, his rifle still trembling in his grip. He looked at her like she might explain what had just happened, like she might tell him how to carry the weight already settling on his shoulders. But she said nothing. Instead, she touched the pocket where the letter lay. The paper warm against her skin, her brother's words pressed into her heart. And in the wreckage of silence, she wondered. Had she let him go, or was she waiting for something more than vengeance? Why did the convoy stop when the road was clear? The sound of engines faded into silence, replaced by the faint hiss of the desert wind. Dust lifted in lazy swirls around the armored vehicles, their outlines blurred against the horizon. She was in the third truck, her rifle across her lap, boots pressed firm to the steel floor. No one spoke. That silence felt heavier than any command. Her pulse climbed. This wasn't on the plan. She leaned forward slightly, watching the driver's knuckles whiten on the wheel. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. The younger private beside her kept shifting, fingers twitching near the latch of his vest, his breath too quick. She noticed it all because she always noticed, the things most eyes skimmed past, the tiny tells that whispered louder than words. Her throat tightened. She had seen this once before. Another mission. Another stop that came without warning. That time, half her unit didn't come back. But no one else here knew that story. She had never told it. She adjusted her grip on the rifle. The weight of it was oddly comforting, like holding a truth you couldn't say out loud. The radio crackled, then died, static. That was the moment the dread truly sank in. The lieutenant's voice came back, strained, too controlled. "We hold position." She closed her eyes for a brief second, held her breath. She hated those words. Holding position meant waiting for what was already moving toward you. She opened her eyes again and scanned the ridges of rock that flanked the dirt road. The desert wasn't empty. It never was. Shapes shifted where the shadows broke. Maybe tricks of light, maybe not. The younger private whispered, "Why aren't we moving?" She didn't answer. She didn't want to scare him with her truth, because something was wrong. Her chest ached with the weight of memory. The last time a convoy stopped like this, she had been seated just like this, the hum of engines, the taste of dust, the silence stretched taut. Then came the fire. Then came the screaming. But she had survived. Barely. And she had sworn to herself she would never sit quiet through that moment again. She tapped the metal floor twice with the heel of her boot, a nervous habit she had carried for years. No one noticed, but to her, it was like grounding herself in reality, keeping panic from spiraling into chaos. The lieutenant climbed down from the lead truck. His boots hit the dirt. He walked toward the ridge with binoculars raised. His posture was stiff, but his pace betrayed uncertainty. She could see it. The wind pressed against the windows of their vehicle, carrying grains of sand that ticked softly against the metal. Small sounds, almost soothing, almost cruel. She leaned forward, whispering low, more to herself than anyone else. "Don't stand still." The private beside her tilted his head. "Ma'am." She shook it off. Nothing. But the unease was growing. Her mind drifted to a memory she couldn't control, a woman's voice, warm and steady. Her mother, a farm kitchen, the smell of bread. The words that had stayed with her since she was 8. When you feel the silence bow, you speak. You don't wait. You speak, and you carry the weight for the ones who can't. Her breath hitched. That was years ago. A lifetime, but the words had stayed. Maybe too much. Her chest burned with a strange mix of fear and responsibility. She felt it building, that pull to break the silence now, to act before the quiet shattered. But she hesitated, because speaking out in the wrong moment had a cost. She had learned that too. The lieutenant turned, hand raised, about to signal the convoy. But then, the crack of a rifle split the air. The glass of his binoculars shattered, spraying fragments. He fell, sand billowing around him. The silence broke. Shouts erupted. The young private flinched so hard his helmet slipped sideways. Gunners scrambled, weapons clattering into firing positions. The driver cursed under his breath, fumbling with the ignition. And she didn't move at first. Because in that frozen second, her past and present collapsed together. She saw two scenes at once, her lieutenant falling now, and her sergeant falling years ago in another desert, another mission gone wrong. She tasted the same metallic fear. Her heart pounded, but then the second stretched too long and she snapped back into now. "Get down," she barked, shoving the young private to the floor just as a burst of fire ripped through the windshield. Glass rained down. The driver screamed, a shallow cut across his cheek. She grabbed the wheel, yanked it, forcing the truck into a lurch that pushed it partially off the road, angling the armor toward the ridge. It wasn't perfect cover, but it was something. Her voice cut through the chaos, low but firm. "Return fire, keep low, watch the ridge." The private obeyed instantly, crawling toward the mounted gun. His hands shook but steadied once they wrapped around steel. Bullets thudded against armor, sparks spat, dust clouded. She breathed once, deep, before sliding her rifle up against the shattered window. Her cheek pressed cold steel, her eye locked down the scope. A flicker of movement on the ridge, a shoulder, a flash of cloth, the barrel of a weapon glinting. She exhaled and fired. The figure dropped. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let herself pause. This wasn't about hesitation, not now. The convoy came alive with noise, the kind that fills every corner of thought, gunfire, shouts, the thrum of engines fighting to turn over. Yet beneath it all she still heard the silence. That strange weight in the gaps between shots. That silence was bowing, bending low. She felt her mother's words again, felt the weight of forever. She wanted to scream at them to move, to push forward, to break free before the enemy swarmed tighter. But her voice caught in her throat. What if she was wrong? What if speaking now cost lives instead of saving them? Her hands tightened on the rifle. The lieutenant was still down in the dirt. No movement. Blood pooled beneath his shoulder. He might be alive, he might not. Someone had to command. Her chest heaved. Her lungs felt like fire. She could feel every eye flick toward her, even in the chaos. Not openly, not obvious, but they looked. Soldiers sense when the weight shifts, when someone has to carry it. Her lips parted. She didn't know what words would come. Not yet. But soon. What do you do when everyone is waiting for words you're not sure you're allowed to speak? The stench of dust and gunpowder clung to the air, thick and bitter, searing her throat every time she inhaled. The convoy was scattered, half hidden behind armored steel and half exposed on a road that had turned into a trap. Somewhere in the mess of it all lay the lieutenant, bleeding, motionless, the symbol of order crumpled into the dirt. Her hands trembled as she reloaded, the cold click of the magazine locking into place grounding her for a split second. Around her, panic surged in half-sentences, shouted commands from corporals who didn't sound like they believed themselves. The young private at the gun was firing in short, desperate bursts, his aim too high, his nerves too loud. She wanted to tell him to steady his breath, to squeeze not yank, but her voice stuck. The silence inside her pressed heavy. It wasn't just the noise of battle, it was the weight of waiting too long. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew this moment. She had lived its shadow before. On another mission she hadn't spoken, hadn't stepped up, and the silence had swallowed them. Too many gone. The memory throbbed like an open wound. Her jaw clenched. She couldn't let it happen again. She rose halfway from her cover, shouting above the crack of rifles, her voice raw and sharp. "Shift fire left, push them off the ridge. Driver, get us moving now." Heads snapped toward her, not in resistance but in relief. They needed someone to carry the weight, and she had just claimed it. The driver blinked at her, stunned, then gritted his teeth and slammed the ignition again. The engine roared to life, coughing through the dust. The young private pivoted his fire lower, more controlled. And just like that, the silence bowed. She felt it inside her, a strange surge of clarity. Her words weren't perfect, but they carried something stronger than precision, conviction. For a heartbeat, she swore she could feel her mother's presence beside her, nodding, as if the kitchen from her childhood had bled into this battlefield. The convoy lurched forward, tires grinding against rock. The gunners fired in controlled patterns, pushing the ambushers back into cover. The air still burned with chaos, but it was no longer without shape. It had rhythm now. She ducked as a round pinged against the metal inches from her head, shards grazing her cheek. The sting lit fire in her nerves, but she didn't falter. "Eyes right ridge," she barked, pointing, even as her rifle came up. A figure darted from shadow to shadow. She fired once, missed, fired again. The target collapsed mid-stride, rolling down the incline in a spray of sand. Her pulse throbbed at her temples. She hated how automatic it had become, the act of pulling life away with one squeeze. The guilt always came later in quieter rooms when she had time to imagine who they had been. But now wasn't later, now was survival. The convoy cleared the choke point, the open desert stretching ahead. The ambush fire grew thinner, less organized. They had broken the trap, for now. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice steadier, as if the silence had accepted her role. Inside, though, she was trembling. She wasn't supposed to command. She wasn't the officer. She wasn't even meant to speak in these moments. And yet, if she had, she couldn't shake the image of them all lying in the sand just like before. The young private's breathing steadied as he fired. Between bursts, he glanced at her, eyes wide with something almost like gratitude. That small look twisted something in her chest. He was barely 20, too young for this war, too young to carry scars like hers. When the firing finally tapered into nothing but wind, the silence that followed was deafening. Not the bowing silence from before, but the hollow silence after chaos, the one that leaves ringing in the ears and ghosts in the mind. She scanned the convoy. Casualties. Too many, though fewer than it could have been. Medics worked frantically, pulling men and women into shade, patching wounds with hands that shook from adrenaline. The lieutenant still hadn't moved. Her throat tightened as she jogged toward him. He lay half buried in sand, blood seeping from his shoulder and chest. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. Faint, unfocused, but alive. She pressed gauze against the wound, her hand slick with crimson. "Stay with me, sir. Don't you quit on us." His lips moved, barely audible. "Who gave the order?" She froze. The question pierced her deeper than the sound of gunfire had. Her heart stuttered, she swallowed hard. "I did." For a moment she thought he would rebuke her, remind her of chain of command, of boundaries she wasn't supposed to cross. But instead he gave a faint, pained smile. Good. Then his eyes slipped shut again. She blinked rapidly, holding the pressure, refusing to let him fade. The medic rushed over, sliding in beside her. We've got him, go. She hesitated. She didn't want to let go, but she forced herself to trust, rising slowly, blood sticking to her palms. Her breath came shallow. Her words had carried them through, but now the silence had returned, heavier, more complicated. She stood among the wounded and the weary, staring out at the ridge they had just fought through. The desert looked the same as before, endless, indifferent, but everything inside her had shifted. And yet, beneath the quiet victory, a darker thought gnawed. What if speaking again cost more than silence ever had? She didn't know the answer. Not yet. But the weight of forever was only growing heavier. How long can a convoy keep moving on hope alone? The desert stretched endless in every direction, flat and blinding beneath the high sun. Heat shimmered in waves, turning the horizon into a mirage. Tires cut long scars through the sand as the convoy crawled forward, engines grumbling, armor groaning with every mile. She sat in the rear truck again, her rifle laid across her knees, eyes fixed on the nothingness ahead. But inside her head, the battle replayed on a loop, the crack of the rifle, the lieutenant falling, the young private's trembling hands, her own voice breaking through the silence. Every detail replayed too vividly, and with each loop the question burned hotter. Had she done enough, or had she stepped too far? The lieutenant was still alive, but barely. The medic's updates were cautious, his words clipped, hiding his own doubt. Lost a lot of blood, will stabilize, but we need evac. Evac that wasn't coming, not out here, not in time. She clenched her jaw. The guilt pressed in, not because she had spoken, but because maybe she hadn't spoken soon enough. The younger private sat across from her, helmet in his lap, sweat streaking dirt across his face. His eyes wouldn't stop flicking to her, as if silently asking for something he couldn't put into words. Guidance, assurance, maybe even forgiveness for his own panic. She forced a faint nod. It wasn't much, but it was all she could give. The wind picked up, carrying sand like whispers. She remembered the farm fields of her childhood, the way tall grass bent under the same kind of invisible hand. That memory should have calmed her. Instead, it hurt, because she remembered more. She was 16 when the first recruiters came through town. Her father had told her to stay inside. The military isn't a place for you, he'd said, not unkindly, but with a certainty that cut. She had listened from the kitchen, her mother's hand resting gently on hers. And when silence fell heavy in that room, her mother had leaned close and whispered, "Sometimes silence needs breaking, not for them, for you." Those words had carried her into the life she chose. And yet here she was, years later, wondering if silence had been safer after all. The convoy slowed suddenly. She snapped back to the present, heart kicking against her ribs. "Why are we stopping?" she asked. The driver muttered, voice tight. "Road washed out. Storm last week must have eaten it. Bridge is gone." She leaned forward, squinting through the cracked windshield. Ahead, the dirt track ended abruptly at a broken span of concrete, jagged and useless. Below, a dry ravine stretched wide, its bed littered with rock and rusted debris. Too steep to drive, too exposed to cross. The lieutenant would never survive being carried on foot across that open stretch. They all knew it. Tension spread through the convoy like a fever. Soldiers climbed down, scanning horizons, weapons raised, eyes darting to every shimmer of heat as if enemies would rise from the mirage itself. The silence grew unbearable. No one wanted to say it, but everyone felt it. They were trapped. Her palms itched. That same old weight pressed down again. They were waiting for words, but whose? She stepped down onto the sand, boots sinking slightly with each step. The heat bit through her uniform. The ravine yawned before her like a wound. The sergeant from the second truck approached, his face set hard, eyes tired. "We can't stay here. too exposed. If they regroup, we're finished. She met his gaze. Options. He hesitated. We could backtrack, but it'll cost hours, maybe more, and fuel not our friend right now. Her stomach turned. Backtracking meant retracing through ambush country. Forward meant exposure. Both meant bleeding time they didn't have. The young private's voice cracked from behind her. What if we send someone ahead, just one, find a crossing? Every head turned toward him, his face flushed, regret flashing across his features. I mean. She cut in, her tone soft but firm. No, not one, we move together. Because she remembered what splitting apart had cost her years ago. The last time she had watched a friend vanish into the desert alone, promising to find help. He had never returned. The silence of his absence still haunted her. The sergeant frowned. Then what? We dig. She scanned the ravine again. The slope looked impossible, but maybe not. Her heart beat faster, not from fear but from the spark of something else. Determination. She spoke, her voice low at first, then rising. We don't wait to be hunted. We move. We cut a path. Anchor cables guide the trucks down. It'll be slow, it'll be ugly, but we don't stop. The silence bowed again. She felt it. The weight of her words pressing into the air, into the bones of every soldier listening. The sergeant studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. You heard her. Let's work. The shift was immediate. Soldiers moved, shouting for equipment, unspooling cables, driving stakes into hard earth. The convoy came alive with purpose, not panic. She joined them, her hands blistering against the rope as she hauled steel into place. Sweat stung her eyes. Dust filled her lungs. But it didn't matter. She couldn't stand back, not now, not ever again. Hours blurred. The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in bruised gold. One by one, the trucks crept down into the ravine, tires slipping, engines whining. Soldiers pushed, guided, steadied. Every crunch of gravel under wheels sounded like fate teetering on the edge. And through it all, she stayed near the lieutenant's vehicle. His pale face was barely visible through the window, his chest rising in shallow rhythms. She whispered under her breath as they moved, words he would never hear but that she needed to say, "Stay with me. I can't carry this weight alone." The last truck reached the ravine floor. Relief rippled through the convoy, but it was fragile. They still had to climb the far side. The hardest part remained. As she tightened a cable on the lead vehicle, the young private approached, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, why do you keep speaking up? I mean, I'm glad you do. But weren't you scared?" She paused, looking at him. His eyes weren't mocking or challenging. They were searching, raw with the need for an answer. She took a long breath. The wind carried the sound of shifting sand, the faint creak of cables straining. "I was terrified," she admitted. Her voice came out softer than she expected. "Every time, but silence costs more. I've learned that." He swallowed, nodding slowly, as if holding onto her words like a lifeline. And for a fleeting second, she wondered if maybe that was her purpose. Not just surviving battles, but carrying the weight of words others couldn't. But then the rope snapped. A sharp crack split the air. The lead truck lurched sideways, wheels grinding against loose rock. Soldiers shouted, scrambling. She didn't think. She threw herself against the rope, grabbing hold of the frayed end, pain searing her palms. The strain jolted through her shoulders, her spine. Another soldier joined, then another, until together they steadied the truck's slide. Her teeth clenched against the burn, sand tore at her boots, muscles screamed. But they held. The truck crept back into line, its wheels finding grip again. The cable was re-anchored, the danger past, for now. She staggered back, chest heaving, palms raw and bleeding. The private stared at her wide-eyed. She forced a faint smile, though her lungs felt like fire. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in that moment, she felt both truths collide inside her, the weight of words, and the weight of silence filled by action. The convoy would move again, but she knew the journey ahead would demand more of both. And she wasn't sure how much she had left to give. What breaks first, steel or spirit? The question haunted her as the convoy crawled forward through the ravine. Night had come down fast, swallowing the desert in shades of black and silver. Moonlight stretched thin over jagged stone, turning every shadow into a question mark, every hollow into a potential ambush. Engines groaned, tires slipped, cables strained. Every movement carried the weight of risk, like they were pulling their entire existence across a knife's edge. She walked alongside the lead truck, boots crunching on gravel, rifle slung but ready. Her palms still burned from the rope, skin raw and torn. But she didn't slow. Pain was just part of the rhythm now: inhale, step, ache, repeat. Behind her, the convoy stretched in a crooked line. Shapes of soldiers moved with a kind of tired precision, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, silence broken only by the clank of gear and the occasional cough muffled into the night. They were alive, but exhaustion was carving its mark. Her gaze kept drifting to the lieutenant's truck. The medics inside were shadows in the dim light, bending, checking, stabilizing. Every time she saw a hand move, her chest loosened slightly. Every time the window stayed still too long, it tightened again. She hated how helpless it felt. She had fought for him, bled for him, spoken words that weren't hers to give. And still, he hovered between worlds, slipping further each mile. The young private trudged up beside her, rifle bouncing against his chest. His face looked older now, cut deeper by fear and fatigue. But there was something steadier in his step, a resolve she hadn't seen in him before. "You really think we'll make it out of here?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. She watched her breath mist faintly in the cooling air, listened to the faint groan of metal under stress. Hope was a fragile thing, too fragile to hand out carelessly. Finally, she said, "We'll make it as far as we have to." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the truth she could carry. They walked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy but thoughtful, almost companionable. And in that stillness, her mind slid back not to the battlefield, not to the ambush, but to the one story she had never spoken aloud. Her brother. He had enlisted 2 years before her. Older, stronger, louder. He had always filled the silence with his words, his laughter, his impossible confidence. When he left, he had promised to write every week. The letters came for a while, stories of sand and sweat, of camaraderie and close calls. Then they stopped. She remembered the knock on the door, the folded flag, the way her father had stood like stone while her mother crumbled. She had wanted to scream, to break the silence with rage, with grief, with anything. But she hadn't. She had swallowed it. She had carried it. And when her turn came to serve, she told no one why. Not even herself, not fully. Now, walking through a ravine filled with ghosts of ambush and betrayal, she realized every word she spoke out here was carrying not just her, but him too. The brother who never got the chance to command, who never got to come home. The thought nearly buckled her knees. She steadied herself with a sharp inhale. A sudden crack echoed through the ravine, not a rifle stone breaking. The convoy froze. Soldiers dropped to knees, scanning, weapons raised. The sound rolled again, louder this time, bouncing from cliff to cliff. "Rockslide," someone hissed. Her heart leapt into her throat. She glanced upward just as a boulder, massive and jagged, tore free from the ridge. It slammed into the ravine wall, exploding into shards. Dust and gravel rained down, peppering helmets and armor. Then came another and another. It wasn't nature, it was deliberate. Contact. Gunfire erupted from above. Muzzle flashes lit the ridge in bursts, bright against the night. Bullets sparked off steel, whining through the narrow corridor. Soldiers scrambled for cover, pressed against trucks, some firing upward blindly into the black. She dropped to one knee, rifle raised, eyes scanning for angles. The high ground was a death sentence. They were boxed in, shooting uphill at ghosts. The private beside her shook, his breathing ragged. "We can't hold here." She cut him off, voice sharp. "Focus, find your target." But even as she barked it, she knew he was right. Holding here was death. Her pulse pounded. She needed to think, needed to find the crack in the trap. Her eyes caught movement, not the shooters, but the shadows behind them. Figures shifting, not in attack, but in coordination. She squinted. The pattern wasn't random. It was staged. They weren't trying to kill them all, not yet. They were corralling, hurting. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't an ambush. It was a capture. The realization cut through her like ice. They wanted prisoners. Maybe intel, maybe leverage. Whatever it was worse than death. She felt the silence bow again, crushing, suffocating. Every instinct screamed at her to speak, to break it, to lead them through. But the risk, if she chose wrong, they all died. If she stayed quiet, they were caged. Her mother's words echoed like a ghost. When you feel the silence bow, you speak. Her throat ached, her palms stung. Her heart carried too many ghosts already. She rose into the storm of gunfire, standing taller than fear should allow. Her voice cut through the chaos, raw, fierce, unshaking. "Forward, all vehicles, push through the center. Don't stop, don't scatter. We make our own path." For a heartbeat there was hesitation. Then engines roared to life, louder than gunfire, louder than the silence. Trucks lurched forward, steel grinding against rock, sparks flying. Soldiers shouted, firing upward to cover the push. The convoy surged as one, a beast made of battered steel and raw will. Boulders crashed, bullets rained, but momentum became shield. She sprinted beside the lead truck, lungs burning, legs pumping. Dust choked the air, turning the world into a blur of grit and motion. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The young private stumbled, nearly falling beneath a wheel. She grabbed his vest, yanking him upright with strength she didn't know she had. "Keep moving." The ravine walls narrowed, then widened. A gap, an exit, salvation carved in stone. The convoy burst through, engines howling, leaving the kill box behind. Gunfire faded into echoes. The night opened above them, wide and starlit. They were out. For now. She collapsed against the side of the truck, chest heaving, sweat pouring. Soldiers staggered, some laughing in disbelief, some weeping quietly in relief. The young private sank to his knees, gasping, then looked at her with eyes full of something more than gratitude, reverence maybe. She hated it. Because she knew the truth. She wasn't fearless. She wasn't unbreakable. She was just the one who spoke when silence bowed. And every time she did, the weight grew heavier. As the convoy regrouped, she glanced back at the ravine. In the distance, shadowed figures still watched from the ridge, not chasing, not retreating, just waiting. This wasn't over. And deep down, she feared the silence had only begun. She never spoke about the dream. Not to the commander, not to the others, not even to the chaplain who stopped her in the corridor one evening and asked if she needed to talk. It wasn't the mission that haunted her. It was what came after. The way silence followed her now like a shadow that never moved. The hangar lights glared white across the steel floor, and she stood in the middle of it, helmet under one arm, waiting for the final transport out. Around her, soldiers gathered their kits, laughed too loudly, argued about nothing, anything, as if noise could hold back the weight pressing on all of them. She stayed apart, her voice folded back inside her chest. And yet people looked to her anyway. Not the way they looked at a leader, but the way you watch someone who carries something you can't name. She learned that silence could draw more attention than words. They wanted her to explain how she'd held it together in the hills, how she'd called the shots when comms were dead, when supply lines collapsed, when the air was thick with smoke and no one could see 10 feet ahead. But she couldn't explain it, because it wasn't bravery. It was something far stranger. What they didn't know, what she would never tell them, was that every order she gave had been shaped by a memory. Not of tactics, not of training, but of a promise whispered years ago, standing in the doorway of a farmhouse kitchen, sunlight on her younger brother's face. "You'll come back, right?" he'd asked. And she had said yes. Every step, every breath, every impossible decision on that mountain had been tied to that word. Yes. The engines of the transport roared to life, cutting through her thoughts. She closed her eyes, let the sound wash over her. For a moment, it was easier to believe the noise could carry the silence away. But silence doesn't bow to machines. It bowed only once. That night when she spoke into the comms, voice raw and steady, telling broken men and women to stand, to fight, to hold. Words carrying more weight than bullets, more weight than steel. Words that weren't hers alone, but the echo of every face she'd promised to protect. Now those words followed her. They clung heavy forever. She walked up the ramp, found her seat, sat alone. The soldier across the aisle glanced at her and then quickly looked away, as if afraid that meeting her eyes would draw some truth out of him he wasn't ready to face. She understood. The flight lifted, the ground shrank, and she thought of what waited on the other side: questions, reports, ceremonies, medals. None of it mattered. None of it touched what really lived inside the silence. And so the narrator's voice lowered, almost a whisper, as if sharing something sacred with the audience. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. It simply acts. And when it does, even silence bows. The image fades, her face half-lit by the cabin glow, eyes fixed forward, the hum of engines swallowing the last trace of sound, leaving only stillness, a stillness that lingers, a stillness that carries the weight of forever.